are moments in history that arrive quietly. No thunder, no clash of armies, no cries of victory echoing through the city, and yet they change everything. This was one of those moments. After years of hardship, years of patience that stretched the limits of the human heart, after exile from a city that was loved more than any other place, they were returning, not as fugitives, not as the oppressed, but as a people who had been carried by faith through every trial. And now they stood at the edge of home.
إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح.
When Allah's ultimate help comes and the victory over Mecca is achieved.
Victory had finally arrived. But this was not the kind of victory the world was used to. It did not come with pride or arrogance or the overwhelming display of power. It came with humility, with lowered heads, with hearts that understood that this moment was not theirs, but a gift from Allah. And as they entered Makkah, the city that once pushed them out, no swords were raised, no battles were fought. This victory was never meant to be written in blood. It was meant to be written in mercy. At the center of this city stood a house, ancient, sacred, built generations ago for a single purpose, to worship one God, Allahu Ahad. But over time, that purpose had been forgotten, and in its place stood hundreds of idols, silent, lifeless, 360 symbols of misguidance, placed where only Tawheed belonged.
وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا.
And declare, the truth has come, and falsehood has vanished. Indeed, falsehood is bound to vanish.
And as each idol fell, it was not just stone that was breaking. It was illusion. It was generations of misplaced belief quietly collapsing in the presence of truth. Because truth does not need to be loud. It does not need to prove itself. It simply stands, and everything else fades away. And in that moment, the sanctuary was restored. Not just physically in form, but in meaning. This was not destruction. This was purification. Before him stood the people of Quraysh, the very people who had once rejected him, who had mocked his message, who had caused pain not only to him, but to those who believed in him. People who had forced him to leave the city he loved now stood with nothing except fear, because this was the moment history had conditioned them to expect revenge. This was where power usually demands retribution, where strength is measured by how much one can take, and the balance finally shifts. But what unfolded was something entirely different. No mass punishment came, no settling of scores, no reopening of wounds. Instead, there was restraint, a silence that spoke louder than any retaliation ever could.
فبما رحمة من الله لنت لهم ولو كنت فظا غليظ القلب لانفضوا من حولك فاعف عنهم واستغفر لهم وشاورهم في الأمر فإذا عزمت فتوكل على الله إن الله يحب المتوكلين.
It is through mercy from Allah that you are gentle to them. Had you been rough and hard-hearted, they would have dispersed from around you. So pardon them and seek forgiveness for them. Consult them in the matter, and once you have taken a decision, place your trust in Allah. Surely Allah loves those who place their trust in Him.
It was not strategy or politics. It was mercy, so unexpected that it began to dismantle fear from within their hearts. And in that moment, Makkah was not just conquered, it was transformed by mercy. And years later, the journey would come full circle, not with conquest, but with completion. He returned once more, not as a leader reclaiming a city, but as a servant, teaching humanity in how to return to Allah. For in the 10th year after migration, the Prophet, peace be upon him, would perform his first and only Hajj. This was a living lesson, a demonstration of how to worship, to surrender, to return to Allah, a stripping away of status, identity, and everything that separates one human being from another, until all that remains is a servant standing before his Lord. Every step is intentional. Every action is precise. A religion no longer just taught, but shown. And then, in Arafah, a moment in time unlike any other, where the noise of the world fades and the soul finally speaks. There is no performance, no audience, just servants and the weight of everything they carry. Regret, hope, longing, all laid bare before Allah. Hajj is Arafah. In this moment, everything comes together. Every dua, every tear, carried to the one who hears it all. It is about what you bring in your heart. And under the open sky, with no roofs above them or possessions beside them, the human being returns to what they truly are. No barriers, only them and their Lord. In the final rites, they cast more than stones. They cast away pride. They cast away temptation. They cast away everything that stands between them and Allah. A journey of the body becomes a purification of the soul. In Mina, stones are cast at the whispers of Shaitan within. Each act precise and intentional, a ritual shaped by revelation.
قال صلى الله عليه وسلم: يا أيها الناس خذوا مناسككم فإنني لا أدري لعلي لا أحج بعد عامي هذا.
O people, learn your rituals of Hajj, for I do not know whether I will perform Hajj again after this year.
As they circle the Kaaba, they are not just walking, they are aligning themselves around a single truth. A truth that began here. A moral foundation, a spiritual path, a system of worship perfected. From the return to Makkah to the final acts of worship, everything had come together. Guidance in its most complete form.